In Proverbs 17, verses 15 to 28, the main contrasts are between the righteous and the wicked, and the wise and the foolish. And the overall counsel is that a warped mind warps reality. I remember when I was young, I went to a kids museum, and they had these goggles that you could put on that were supposed to show you what it looked like through the eyes of a drunk person. And so you'd put the goggles on, and you had to walk a straight line, just like the sobriety tests that police officers administer. And I remember looking down at that line, which was supposed to be straight, but it was crooked and wobbly and almost seemed to be moving. And my warped vision made it impossible to walk along that straight line because the reality of what that line actually looked like was completely warped by my warped vision. And that's the way folly is. When we give our minds over to foolishness, we lose the proper sense of reality. And I'm getting this counsel mainly from 4 verses in today's reading. In verse 15, it says, "He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous, both of them alike are an abomination to the Lord." So if you have a mind warped by folly, you cannot tell the difference between a righteous person and a wicked person. You actually get them confused, and you think the righteous person is wicked, and you think the wicked person is righteous. That same idea is in verse 26. "It is not good to fine the righteous, nor to strike the noble for their uprightness." Only a foolish ruler would think to penalize good people. The 3rd verse is verse 20. "He who has a crooked mind finds no good, and he who is perverted in his language falls into evil." When your heart and mind is crooked, twisted, and perverted, everything you see in this world is also twisted and crooked and perverted. And so you can't find anything truly good and beautiful in this world because your mind is programmed not to see those things. And finally, verse 24, "Wisdom is in the presence of the one who has understanding, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth." Fools with warped minds are not focused on what's right in front of them in the present. They're always staring off into the distance, daydreaming and fantasizing about things that aren't real or possible. Why? Because a mind warped by foolishness cannot handle the realities right in front of them. They can't focus on the need of the moment. One writer said his eyes are on the ends of the earth, rolling and wandering from one object to another. His thoughts are scattered. He has no definite objective, no certain way of life. Talent, cultivation of mind, and improvement of opportunity are all frittered away. And we can see this theme tied into other verses as well, like verse 16. "A fool thinks he can actually buy wisdom with money, not realizing that that is not the cost of wisdom. Wisdom requires sacrifice and diligence and reflection and patience and pain and suffering. But a fool with a warped mind has no idea what wisdom really costs." And if someone's mind is warped by folly, they likely have a warped idea of friendship. And they probably think friendship is just about having fun with people you have things in common with. But when adversity comes, they leave. If our mind is warped by folly, we don't understand the danger in verse 18 of taking on someone else's debts and saying, "We'll be responsible for that if you can't pay it." It sounds like we're being a great friend, but we're actually putting our relationship at great risk and enabling someone to buy something they can't afford. People with crooked minds actually love sin, and they raise their door, which is an expression for pride. And because fools have such a distorted view of reality, they bring great sorrow to their parents in verse 21 and verse 25. And instead of bringing joy to their parents in verse 22, they leave them with broken spirits. And the truth is, if your view of reality is distorted, you're going to have a broken spirit too. A warped mind has a warped view of justice in verse 23. And it's not about who's innocent or guilty, it's about who has the most money. And finally, if your view of reality is warped in verses 27 and 28, you'll think the best thing to do is to share what you know about everything with everyone at every moment. But people in touch with reality know actually there are times when it's best to be silent. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, "It is better to keep your mouth shut and let them think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." And so So the challenge for us is to realize sin is not just something that we act upon. Sin is something that acts upon us. Sin is like poison that corrodes our hearts and our minds from within and begins to twist us and distort our view of reality. Have you ever been around someone who's so poisoned by sin that everything is a double entendre about sex? Everything someone says, they twist it and pervert it to make it sound like they're saying something dirty. And if your mind isn't twisted, you're thinking about this person. Why is your mind so in the gutter that you would take this perfectly innocent thing that was said and twist it into something filthy? But that's because they're wearing those sin goggles that warps and changes everything they see into something sinful. If you've known people who are addicted to pornography or alcohol or drugs, they will tell you how much that changed the way they saw the world for the worse. And it totally warped their view of reality so that an alcoholic can think that his wife is perfectly happy with him and they've got a great life, while in reality she's absolutely miserable and can't wait to leave him. And the person watching pornography thinks that real love is about objectification and the enjoyment of our physical bodies, but they have no real appreciation for emotional intimacy because porn is programming their brain to have a warped sense of the one flesh connection. This is why in Romans chapter 1, when he talks about the Gentiles turning to idolatry and abandoning God, he says they became futile in their speculations and their foolish heart was darkened. Proclaiming to be wise, they became fools. And in Titus 1 and verse 15, he says, to the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their mind and their consciences are defiled. And this points to Christ, because think about how warped your view of reality has to be to put the perfectly sinless Son of God on the cross. Think of how twisted and sinful and backwards your heart has to be to accuse someone perfectly innocent of being a criminal worthy of the most humiliating and torturous death possible. And of course, to make matters worse, they traded Jesus' life for Barabbas. They were guilty of Proverbs 17:15 by letting a murderer out of prison and putting God's Son in his place. They justified the wicked and they condemned the righteous. Why? Because their sinful, foolish minds had been so warped that they had a warped view of reality. But the good news is Jesus has the power to restore our warped minds. He has the power to straighten what sin has made crooked. And I think about when he healed the crazy demoniac in Mark chapter 5, and it says they found that man clothed and in his right mind. And then in Romans 12, Paul says by the power of Christ, we can be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may approve of the same things God approves of, and that you will have his same definition of what is good and acceptable and perfect. So as we call on God for wisdom, our prayer today is, Father, help us see straight again. Please straighten what Satan has made crooked so we can see reality for what it is, and we can see the straight line of your path to heaven more clearly with each passing day.